MultimediaJay Radio style.
What is up, everybody? It's a beautiful spring day here in Sticksville, Connecticut. The temperature has actually made it into the mid-70s, so anybody here that was thinking of going after Punxsutawney Phil with pitchforks and torches and stuff like that, maybe they should back off on that a bit. The poor thing's only a groundhog after all, but it's great to finally see some spring weather around here instead of some of the flip-floppy stuff where it's somewhat warm during the day and then down in the 20s at night. So you're like, is it spring or what? Classic April weather here. But anyways, I originally was going to talk about some stuff that's been in the news lately, but it got a little too angry talk radio, and I want to try and get away from some of that before people think I'm just out to be another Michael Savage or something like that, one of those radio hosts who gets people mad and in order to get people to listen. So I just want to prove that I can still talk about stuff that's not so Eeyore, for lack of a better term, and stuff like that. First things first, though, a question for all of you listeners out there. I've been tossing around the idea of combining the podcast and radio style into a single unified series called MultimediaJay Radio. Basically, the point of both of these series over the course of the times they've been going on has been to sound kind of like an AV Geek's alternative to video blogging that sounds more like talk radio. The only difference between these two series is pretty much artificial at this point. It just depends on how big the topic is that I want to talk about, whether I do a radio style or a podcast. There's really not much of a reason, as I quietly put my watch away so it doesn't beep in the middle of recording like it did the last time I tried recording something this afternoon. Got my stopwatch going because I'm trying to do this YouTube-y stuff and some laundry at the same time. So, yeah, chores. Why can't I just do this stuff on the weekend? Anyways, the differences between radio style and the podcast series have been becoming more and more artificial over the last several months. Radio styles have been getting longer when I want to talk more about stuff. The radio styles have been sounding more like a replacement for the podcast. And one of these days I'm going to get around to Dysfunctionomy, but even if I were doing podcasts straight from the get-go, I don't have that many topics, really, that I really want to do a full-length podcast about. So even if I were doing podcasts straight from the very beginning of the year, like I originally was thinking of doing, I still would have them few and far between because there really aren't that many topics out there that I really want to talk about for that long at a time. So since everything's right in front of me like this, and it's quite obvious what I should do here, I'm just thinking of just uniting the two and making a MultimediaJay Radio and just doing whatever I feel like whenever, which is pretty much how I do things with the other series on this channel. So let me know in the comments what you think. I'd also, for radio style, I try to make it a little more radio sounding than what it currently is, with just the Barry White style deep voice MultimediaJay Radio style and music and stuff like that. But it'd be pretty interesting. It's been funny watching some of these audio things that I do on here get more views on YouTube than some of the video stuff that I do. So apparently somebody likes listening to this sort of stuff. Or maybe I was right when I started this series, because back during the days when video blogging was more popular than it is right now, I'd often find myself listening to vloggers instead of watching them, because they basically just sat in front of the camera and talked all the time. So I'd listen to what they had to say while playing World of Warcraft or something like that. I imagine there must be other people out there that do that too. But again, the radio style series was created out of that obvious thing. It's here in front of me. Let's just do it. Now, here I am listening to vloggers instead of watching them, because basically they just sit in front of their camera talking all the time. Why not just give people something to listen to that won't use as much bandwidth, will be quicker to upload, and it'll be easier to put together, because I have way more experience mixing audio than mixing video. Yeah, plus there's other things too, because of the nature of video and all that stuff, the whole looks thing and all this other stuff, like as opposed to having a face for radio or something along those lines. But I'm thinking once again we've come to this point where it's right in front of me. Both the podcast and radio style are meant to sound like talk radio, and the only difference is artificial in nature. Namely, how big the topic is and how long I want to talk about that stuff, and whether I got any fake commercials or anything like that. So, why not just do the obvious here and mix the two together? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you think that's a stupid idea, let me know. As it is right now, I'm leaning towards just uniting the two together and just making it sound more like a coherent whole where you could actually play the playlist for MultimediaJay Radio, and you'll basically, it'll sound like you're listening to the radio as the segments cycle through if you have it on autoplay. So just something I'm tossing around. In the meantime, speaking of radio, I'm looking at an Associated Press posting on Facebook from a radio station around here. What has journalism become these days? Check this out. From the newsroom, Associated Press, Chrysler is recalling about 30,000 small SUVs because a faulty hose inside the gas tank can cause them to run out of fuel. The recall affects Jeep Patriot and Jeep Compass four-wheel drive vehicles from the 2012 model year. If they run out of gas, the engines can stall. Really? Who wrote this for the AP? These folks do know how cars work, right? If they run out of gas, the engines can stall? Gee, I wonder. Has the automobile industry really made that much progress that there's engines now that continue running after they run out of gas? Who wrote this up, man? Sometimes journalists these days just... even without trying to be funny, they're a pretty good source of comedy here. If the engines run out of gas, they can stall. Coming up tonight at 11 o'clock, water is wet, a new scientific discovery reveals. I just got to feel sad for Chrysler, too, though. It seems like Chrysler just can't go more than a couple of years without something stupid like this landing them in the news. In the early 2000s, we had the auto bailout in the mid-2000s, and before that, the PT Cruiser. Ugh, yuck. Probably the ugliest thing I've ever seen on wheels in quite some time. What were they thinking with the PT Cruiser? Was that really the best they could come up with? And then, of course, there was the oil sludge problem with the 3.8-liter engines in cars like the Chrysler Sebring back in the early 2000s, and stuff like that has been ranted about all across the internet when cars blow two engines before 100,000 miles under normal use. We wonder why we had to have an automobile bailout in this country. Actually, no, I wasn't a big fan of the bailouts. You know, bad companies, if bad companies don't get it, see, one of the elements of entrepreneurialism, as I've heard over the years, is you need to be able to learn from your failures. But when organizations don't ever feel the sting of failure and don't have much of a chance to learn from it, at least as much as they would if they had actual money problems instead of getting bailed out, is that a way to break the system of business as we know it? But anyways, poor Chrysler, but I'm cracking up more about the person that wrote this article. If the engines run out of gas, they can stall. Can stall? Anyways. Anywho, here you go, folks. A short radio-style segment that doesn't drag on for close to half an hour. I still have more plans to record more segments for Warehouse Confessions and Dysfunctionomy and all that other fun stuff, but for now, it's beautiful outside. While the weather's great, why don't I go and enjoy it, for crying out loud? Spring has sprung, and I'm glad it finally has sprung, because that winter stuff, man, the snow and the blizzards and the ice and all that assorted nonsense, it gets old after a while. I know tourists are like, yay, you can ski, you can do snowball fights, you can build snowmen. Christmas looks like Christmas in the movies. Snow gets old. Anybody who doesn't live in an area of the country or world that has cold winters, yeah, you're just going to have to take our word for it. It's cool when snow, you get, ooh, first snow. It's cool for a while, but it gets old pretty quickly. Especially when you have something like what we had in 2011 with Snowmageddon, where snowstorm after snowstorm after snowstorm, people's roofs are collapsing because of all the snow piling up that doesn't get a chance to melt. And yeah, snow gets old. So I'm glad spring's finally here. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the unified radio series that I mentioned earlier. Until next time, thanks for listening, everybody. This is Multimedia Jay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.